Hey everyone, I wanted to go over today some of the highlights from the latest Lightroom Classic update. Now, it was released a few weeks ago, and I know that there have been some very notable changes, especially when you look at the panel. There's visually some changes. So, I wanted to go over what some of those major changes are that could be affecting your workflow. And with the article that joins this video, I'm going to have a full list of the changes that are in this update so that even if we don't cover it in the video, you can see what has been changed. So the first one I want to go over is the tone curve changes. And when you look at this tone curve section, you're going to see that it looks a little bit different. We have these icons up here now that were not there before, and the first thing I notice is you're going to have these ones for the color channels, and below before it was a little pull down menu where you could choose what channel the curve changes apply to, and now you can actually adjust each channel curve individually. So the first icon here is for parametric, and that is probably the curve that you're most used to having seen as a default in Lightroom. It's the one where you kind of just drag it and it has these soft curves and it adjusts the darks and shadows and lights and highlights. And you can adjust these sections accordingly to make more changes on the scope of the darks or highlights or shadows and so on. The second icon is for your point curve, and this one you can drag up and down, but when you do that, it adds a point onto this curve. And so you have a little bit more control to create very dramatic visual changes with this curve. You can also do like matte curves here, which can be great for landscape or portraits and stuff like that. And in this one, the noteworthy thing is that here you have your default point curves, just like you did before. And just like before, when you create changes to this with new points, you can save it as a new point curve. And so then you have your own point curve for your own signature look later on, just like any other preset. And then here, if you go to the individual channel curves, you have ability to change those channels. The only one you might use a little bit more, if at all, is the blue channel because you can adjust essentially the warmth. But honestly, I really don't think you're going to actually be using the individual color channels very much for interiors. Or exteriors, really. I think most of your light temperature controls are probably going to be done up here at the top with the eyedropper or the sliders. But you have the option down here. It's really great to know about it. I encourage you to play with the curves and all of the different options within this tone curve section so that you know exactly what you have to be able to control. And you can also, on any of these, you can also do changes down here. So you can see I have a point there, and you can change the points by changing the numbers down here. So that's another way to make adjustments. And that is the tone curve section. And next, I want to come down here to the color panel. Now, normally I work within the HSL section, which is hue, saturation, luminance, and it breaks down each type of adjustment, and under each type of adjustment you have all of your colors. You can go over here to color and it breaks it up into individual colors for you, so you can go to the color that you want to correct and it has hue, saturation, luminance for just that color. And they've changed the look of it, so they have these little circles up here with the colors for each one. And at the very end you can choose all colors, and this is essentially the same. It is the same sliders as over here. It's just categorized by color rather than by type of adjustment. So you can go to red and you have the hue, saturation, luminance just for red, orange, yellow, and so on. So it's just another option, another way to visually categorize what you're doing. And this is really coming down to preference. The next thing I want to go over, and I'm going to go here and kind of adjust these a little bit so that we're not so wacky with our coloring. Okay, that's fine. We'll leave it right there. The next thing I want to go to is with your adjustment or gradient brush. You're going to notice when these sliders open up, you have this color slider here for hue adjustments. And this is another tool that is really, really cool. It gives you just another level of control. I don't think it's going to be one that's going to be super commonly used for interiors, but I really want you to know about it because there are a few instances where it could come in very handy. Now, first thing I want to say is when you're doing any kind of hue adjustment with the brushes, I recommend that you use auto mask. And I'm going to show you why in a minute. So I'm going to leave auto mask unchecked, and I'm going to turn on the mask overlay so you can see where I'm applying the mask. So we have everything set to 0, but if I go and let's see, say for example that I want to make an adjustment to this flower vase, and I say I want to adjust that flower vase area, and you're like, oh, that was a little bit messy, you clean it up a little bit. And instead of having that flower vase be pink, so now we see where we've selected, I'm going to turn that off so you can see the effect. What this shows is I believe it's the top slider is your bottom slider, I believe, is your source color. So when you select an area for masking, it's going to jump to wherever on the color spectrum that point falls. So the area that I masked and where I started masking is pink. So this little pointer here is in the pink area where that tone of pink falls on the color spectrum. If I drag this, if I click and drag, you can see that the bottom moves and the top doesn't. So this little pointer is landed on my pink for my source, but that color is now going to be where it points to on the top slider, on the top spectrum. So the target hue is the top. So you can see it's kind of like a greenish, bluish area, and that's exactly what it did over here. That's essentially what this does, is you can tell it to take this masked area color and change that color to this other color. The great thing is you can also do really fine adjustments if you just want really small changes. And what that does is when you click and drag, it just does really, really small changes. So this is if you want to tweak it, but you don't want to dramatically change the tone. Now I'm going to delete that brush and I'm going to check auto mask because I want to show you why it would be really beneficial. So say for example, I want to adjust this plant and it's got a lot of small parts to it. So with auto mask checked, and I'm going to check this box so that we can see where the brush is being applied. I'm going to start here on one of the leaves and then just kind of brush around the plant. And it's not perfect by any means, but you can see that it's being somewhat selective. And it's going to require a little bit of cleanup, but you can see that it tries to keep some of those edges clean. So if you look, for example, down here, these edges over here are really clean. There's a lot of little creases where I'm going to have to do cleanup, but it's a lot less than if I don't have the auto mask. So auto mask, not a perfect tool, but it's really, really helpful. And so why this is important for this tool when you're adjusting the hue is that if you have an area like this, a plant in front of a window or against a wall, or you have flowers on a table and a window behind it, you want to be able to select details, and this is really helpful in being able to do that. So I'm going to uncheck this box, and you can see that our little pointer is in kind of the light green area, and I'm going to drag it and say I want to make it like pink. And so there you can see it applies the effect to a very selective area. And it's going to apply it to the greens. The auto masking just helps to control what is being selected. So a great tool to have, not something you're going to use a whole lot for interiors, but it was a big, big, big addition to the brushes. So if you're doing any other types of work besides interiors, this is a great tool to be aware of. Okay, so next, I wanted to talk about when you go to crop. Now, if I'm going to go to crop tool up here, this is the grid that I always default to. It's by thirds. And when you are within the crop tool, so the crop tool has to be activated, you can go up here to Tools, Crop Guide Overlay, and you have all your options of the types of grids that you can put over top of your photo. And a new one that's been added is Center. And what this does is it does 4 quadrants. The great thing about this is that it allows you to put something dead center. And this is actually really helpful for interiors or exteriors, because if you are big on symmetry, this is going to help to make sure that what you want to be dead center in that center axis actually is. Now you can also see it when you go to make adjustments down here under Transform. You have this grid come up. The easier thing about using the crop grid with the halves is that it's a much simpler grid, so you can really quickly see where the exact center is. So I recommend that you adjust your lines and your verticals using the Transform first, and if you have to do any cropping, then you can go and use the crop tool. But definitely start with the Transform, and then if you have to crop and if you want to create symmetry, consider doing a different overlay. The center overlay is brand new this time. The other thing I wanted to mention is that they've added new default presets. So if you are a fan of presets or you want to explore with them, there's a presets section here, the top section on the left column within the Develop module. And if you open up presets, go to defaults, and these are all new. They've added a whole bunch here, and you can see it sort of previews them for you if you just hover over it. So you can play around with that. They're also a great starting point. You could always start with those presets and then make adjustments and save them as your own. So those are brand new this time as well. That's it for what I wanted to go over with you in the video. Those are sort of the big highlights. But like I said, check out the adjoining article that goes with this video, because I'm going to have a full list of all of the changes that they've made this time around. I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much.